Okay, stemming from just a question actually from in the Discord on light, on how do you detect light. And I remember when I first started in development, I was actually curious about that too. And you know, it's a tricky thing because it's like, how do you tap into light or the intensity of light that's hitting you? Doesn't make any sense. And it's really not that hard. The biggest thing is you don't. you just don't. You know, it's one of those things where, look at that. Look at that I made. It's just an illusion. Everything is an illusion, right? I mean, so much of what we do in this whole thing is an illusion. And I wanted to show how that looks. So I'm going to get rid of these because I've actually filmed this like 3 times, and I don't know. I just kind of want to remake it because I think I can just remake it better, you know, each time. So if we have a player now, there's a lot of different reasons why you'd have light to hit your player, and maybe it's a stealth game, maybe it's for temperature. What if farming game or something like that? You're building or something, and you have to deal with the environment. And there's kind of 2 different things, and I'm going to show you two different kind of lights. So the first light is just a simple empty object, and I am going to give it a spotlight. Simple as that. I'm going to ram, this up a bit. Take that down, take that up. Right, and the spotlight. And if you want to build stuff for it to have like the volume metrics, fly at it, do it. I'm not going to worry about that right now. I'm just going to use the light. Just so this doesn't get too bloated of a video, and we can call this light. Now, we would need something here to detect if this object goes into this light. All right, so I'm gonna tag this object as a player. Right, you can make whatever tag you want. Right, we can even change his layer and stuff. We change his name. We can give him layers. We can do all sorts of fun stuff. We're not gonna worry about that. I'm just gonna use the tag just in case. So this light, what is it? So, in a very, very simple sense, it is. Let's add maybe a capsule collider, and you could build a collider, like a cone collider if you really wanted to. I'm going to change the direction to the Z axis and ram this height up to about 20 and move it down about 10. Is that about right? Where's the light? Light goes that far. Okay, so let's take this to 40, move this to 20 then. Now the radius, you think like, okay, well, this is a cone, right? This isn't a cone. So you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna make it big. It's just gonna be big. It's gonna be bigger than the actual radius. Now I can make it real big if I really wanted to. In fact, let's extend that too. Probably push this down a bit and mark it as a trigger. Alright, so now we have this big, massive honking light. Right? Okay, well, that radius might be a little excessive. Yeah. kind of like that. Okay, so that's a big ass trigger, right? Cool. What the hell's the point of that? So, and how do we deal with the angle portion, right? So okay, so let's break this down. Let's just break it down first. Let's simply do a trigger event. Let's find out just when the player, and we're gonna do this by tag, right? That's why we gave the player tag. You know, player enter, and we're gonna store that variable. We'll call him player object. Right. So here we just have our little idle state, and we come along, and we could copy this and put it over here, and move this to trigger exit. Right, and we can change this so we don't confuse languages and stuff here. And poof. Okay, so just that alone, just the trigger, pretty simple, nothing much to it. And that alone, obviously, he's in the trigger, he's out of the trigger. He's in the trigger, I mean, he's not actually in the light yet, right? Okay, so cool, you know, that works. It's not very accurate though, is it? So using two states isn't really going to be ideal. We're going to want some more. So the thing is, once we're in this state, we're in the trigger, how do we know we're actually in this cone region of that trigger though? That's what we want to find out. We don't care about the actual trigger itself. We want to be inside the trigger, but we want to be more specifically inside that cone portion. So if I transform direction of myself, and I'm going to transform this object's local forward direction, right? And I can do this. I can do this every frame, because you never know, this thing might be moving, right? This whole thing could be spinning, doing stuff. So let's do this one every frame. Now we want to get position, and we actually need two of those. So let's bring two of them in, and we want to get position of our player object from our trigger, so that when we have the player's position, we'll get that every frame. And we need the position of ourselves, and we'll use that every frame. Now we're going to bring in some math. I know how much everyone loves math. I didn't mean to bring in the vector 2 operator. Let's get rid of that. So the vector 3 operator, let's put them below the positions though. Actually, let's just put them below everything. Let's put them right at the bottom. So the player's position to our position subtract gives us a direction to player. Mark that every frame. Okay, cool. So now we have direction to the player. Now if I copy this operator, now instead of these positions, let's say our local forward to the direction to player, and let's go angle to player. So now we're taking some positions, we're developing some directional vectors, and we can see we get all these fun numbers just floating around now. The angle, well, yeah, let's change that. So the angle to player isn't a vector 3, it is a float. I messed that up. Let's change that. So it comes back as a float, not as a vector. There we go. All fixed up. All better. Fixed a boo-boo. Alright, so there we go. So now we have 14 degrees. Right? how big is our light? Let's take a look at our light. Our light is an angle of 30, right? Which, I mean, we have to use halves. You'll see why, right? So the player, right, so if he's over here, if he's right on the edge of that light, he's about 13 degrees. So if you were to take half of this, that means as long as we're underneath half of that, so 15, we're in the light, right? And if I take the player, you can watch this, I'll show you, right? So we're at 13. If I move, as I move towards the middle, see how that's now I'm right in the middle. Now, granted, this thing's on an angle, so it's not like it's right in the middle of the light portion, but yes, we are in the middle. And the player also sits above, so his positions actually needs to come down technically if you really wanted to get accurate. But point is, there we can tell his angle. So now there's a lot of crap here, right? And we need to do this again, right? Because now we need a float compare. Because if the angle to player is less than this angle, right? So if we want to, we can actually literally just drag this thing in, and we should. Oh, there is no get light radius. No, you could always use get property, I suppose, but I'll just type it in, right? So half of the spot angle, because this thing with angles, I mean, the spot angle's 30 degrees, but it's 15 degrees from the middle this way, 15 degrees in the middle from this way, so it's 30 degrees total, which is why our angle, when we do the math, it's going from the middle. It's 15 degrees. Now it doesn't matter which direction, but it's which is why we're using half. Right? So if we're less, we are in light. And that be every frame, turn that on. Right? So we could literally copy this, place it down here. Now this one is the opposite. If we are greater, we are out of light. Right? And we can come back up there. Get rid of this one. So you should probably actually come into this one first, but the exit still matches up, right? So now we have this 3 thing. But now, personally, one thing, like here's, you got a bunch of actions, and it's doing the same thing. You potentially could just make another FSM and put this stuff in there, and then just do a FSM float compare to keep this one cleaner. Not a big deal in this situation, but that is an option, right? Okay, so here we have this. Now, let's grab our little player, right? So we've entered the light, but we're not, or we've entered the trigger, but we're not in the light. As we move forward, oh, one sec. Okay, there we go. So now we have entered the trigger, but we're not in the light. We move forward, and now we're in the light, right? Now, so the actual angle of that's going to be a little off because this thing's on an angle. The actual light's on an angle. It's not totally up and down. Let's not worry about that right now. All right, so we have that. Now, we may not want this light to be like a true or false, in light, out of light, in light, out of light, because we're just using a trigger. So what we'll do is we'll give this an FSM called value, and we're going to have 2 states, right? We can call this, I don't know, say active, inactive. let's just activate those in that aspect. Right, so now we have these two states. So if I go back into here, if we go into this state, let's send an event. And we can do this. Oh, we can actually do this right at the top, but not that big of a deal. So let's go to the value and say we are active. And we'll copy that and place it in here somewhere. So it can be at the top, that's fine. But we're going to send inactive. And we can do that again in this guy here as inactive. So now this guy, which is our main thing that activates everything, is going to control when this FSM is more or less running or not running, right? So if this thing's active, how do we measure where we are in kind of relation, right? So the first thing we're going to need is we're going to raycast, and we're going to raycast one in our local, and we want two things. We want distance of ray and the hit point. Now we should put a mask on because the player, so if we put the player on a player layer, which you should do, players should be on the player layer, don't leave them on default, we can now mask invert to the player. So we're going to hit everything except for the player. We're not going to hit the player. We want to hit the ground because we're trying to find that point. And we have the distance. So now we can do 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, right there. And 10, we'll actually use this angle, 30. We'll just call it 10 value. And let's do a, wait a minute, that doesn't make, was it a 10? No, I think that's fine. I think we're fine. Anyway, so now we could float operator. Move to the bottom. So we're going to take our tan value and we want the distance, and not the distance, we want, yeah, the distance of ray. We want more or less how large this ray went. We want to multiply that. That's going to be the radius every frame. And just to show you that that's working, let's see how this looks. So we are inactive. So the radius is 18 units. Oh, we have a issue. I must have swapped that. It's probably backwards. Wouldn't be the first time. So we're in here, we're in the light. Oh, okay, so we're, yes, we need to fix that. So this guy here is active, this guy here is the inactive. I did get it backwards, see? Do it all the time. So, if we have this radius, okay, so now if you go to the ecosystem, there is a get distance, but get distance 2, right? And get distance 2 can do something a little special for us. So we need to have, what are the distance 2? So we need the player object, which we don't have yet, so we've got to get that. And we're looking at the distance to the hit point, okay? So that's distance to center. So let's get that object first, because we don't actually have it in this FSM. Alright, so let's go grab that. As long as we do it, let's do this one at the top just in case we need it somewhere else. So we're going to go to the FSM, which is this guy, our main one, and he has the player object. Let's store that into player object. Doesn't need to be every frame on that one. So we get distance 2, so we're getting the distance to the center. Now that changes depending on where you are, of course, with the cone and fun stuff. So one of the things I like to do is float remap, which might be on the ecosystem if you don't have it. So if we take this distance to center and we remap it to the start and the end. So the end is 0, but the start is actually going to be this radius. And then we could do the target start and end. Just 0 to 1 is fine. And we can say distance normalized. We could also clamp that too if we wanted to be on the safe side. So what that will do, let's grab our little player here. So we're inactive, we come along here, and we've now become active. Oh, inactive. Active. Okay, so see how we're remapping? See how it's 0.5, and as I move away, it ends up going down. And as I get closer to the middle, somewhere near the middle, it hits 1, right? So it's more or less taking the circle, and if we, for example, make this a smaller circle by having the lighter down farther, it's not going to matter, right? So we can sit on, say, like the edge, and we're still at 40% ish, 50% to center, 70%, and now because of the height of the capsule, he's not actually sitting at the bottom, so he can't actually hit 100, but there's 90% of being in the center, right? So it doesn't really matter now, because the way and if you make this so it's not quite as on a bigger angle, things are a little more accurate, right? And if you go pretty much max it out there, it's the same idea, right? So we got a much bigger area, but it should now, let's go out and in. So he's at 0.6. Oh, 0.5 or 85%. Slowly getting out of it. Oh, that one's a little off. That one's definitely a little off. I might have messed up my radius. That just does not sound right. I think maybe he has to be half as well. Yeah, okay, so now he's 0. I don't know, because that's only, well, maybe. Yeah, because there's 80%, 85%. So now if I actually go down to where his anchor point is actually, if it was near the actual anchor point, see how it's going up, we're at 91%, right? We're at 4. Okay, so now let's take the light. Let's go downwards. Downwards, dog. Right, so we got a much smaller concentrated circle. And we should have this be the same idea. We should be, yeah, there's like 1%, 50%, 40%. Yeah, so there it is. So yeah, so cut this one in half. apparently. Alright, so you think, okay, so we have this normalized value. What the fuck good does that do? And the beauty part is this is where you can do some customization, because now we can do sample curve, which is why I'm doing just 0 to 1 here. So if we sample at this distance normalized, and we can call this we'll call this one value, right? So this curve is that 0 to 1, right? So if we just put a line in, you're looking at, so when 0 is literally 0, 1 is 1, 0.5 is 0.5, and that's how it'll reflect in the values. But what if we don't quite want that, right? Once you kind of hit, say, closer to the 35% range, so the number climbs really fast as you walk into the light, and then pretty much it's going to be really high, and then it just kind of continues to climb a little bit, but it's already pretty freaking high, right? And that effect, and you could adjust that any which way. Like you can make it so it doesn't climb until like you're right in the middle of the whole fucking thing or something, or whatever the case is, right? Totally customizable, right? So if we go down, we can see the value is at 0.05, right? So it's at 0, 0, 0, it's there, and all of a sudden, like it climbs. See how there's a certain spot in here, like it's still really low, and then right there it starts rapidly climbing, right? Like, oh, we are definitely frickin' seen now, right? So it ends up building this kind of feathering buffing on the edge of the circles, which is cool. And it's totally customizable. You can make that so it's all sorts of things. So okay, so how does this relate to the player though? And the way I would do this is on the player, let's add a proxy. And this is just one way to do it. We can call this heat. So this light, now let's make a new state here, just a quick little start state that just feeds back into this. We can get owner, so we can get our own reference. We want to know what this object is, so I'm just going to call it self. This is self. We have ourselves. So if we're sitting here and we've entered the player, and we're at here, once we've hit the light here, let's array list add, and we want to add to the player object that we're looking at. And we know he has a list called heat. We're going to add a game object, and we're going to add our self. Right? There we go. We've added ourselves. And down here, we're going to want to remove ourselves. But the thing is, if we're coming from here, right, either from here or here, we potentially want to remove ourselves. But if we're coming from here, we don't want to remove ourselves because we're not in a list yet. So let's just pull off of here, and if we exit the player after being in that list, then we will remove ourselves. Oh, not array, remove, array list, remove. Right, so from that same player that we still have a reference to, heat, same idea, the game object, and we're going to remove just ourselves, and then we can go into here. Okay, and we want to do this exact same thing here, right? So this is, oh no, I think I messed this up. Lower 100, supposed to be down here. So this guy should probably start here, right? He should start in the trigger but not in the light. right? So if he exits the trigger, it's not a big deal. If he enters, it's not a big deal. So if we go into the light, we're down here, we want to add. So let's take this one and move him down here above that float compare, just in case. And if we exit the light, we know we've added ourselves, so now let's remove ourselves. And if we've gone just out of the light but we're still in the trigger, we still want to remove ourselves and then go into here. Right, so we have these kind of two removing states. So anytime we're going to leave this state, we're going to do one of those and then go there. So that will give us this effect now. And this is really useful if you have multiple lights or different sources that can also affect this, because maybe it's not just light, maybe you have other things too, right? So as you can see, if you look at this list, you know, it's part of our list, it's not part of the list, part of the list, not part of the list, part of the list, not part of the list. Like, perfect, cool. So let's open up this list and enable events, and let's say add, remove, and add an FSM, and this could be heat manager. And let's go into here. So let's add those two events that we just told that we had. We told them we had it, we didn't even have it. We freaking lied to it. So let's add them. So we add and we remove. So here, anytime something adds or removes from this list now, these two will fire off. So here, if we remove, we can, oh, not contains, is empty. So if this list is not empty, we're gonna go to the add, and you'll see why in a second. Let's put him over here and put this guy on this side. So if we add, what do we want to do? Well, let's make a new state just down here for a minute, and let's go array list get next. So we're going to go through the entire list. So we need looping events, and we need a completed event or done event or finished event, whatever you want to use. So it's a type game object, so let's give it, you know, current source. You can call it whatever you want. And we're going to add those two events. We're going to add loop and done. So we have our array set up right here. So when we loop, all we're going to do is get FSM float, right? And we know it's going to be a source of one of these. Now I'm doing this just to make it super simple for these little things. Don't keep this in here. You need to change this to a variable. Right? So we're going to go, we're more or less going into these FSMs, we're going to pull out the value, right? So let's change this now, very important, change that to the variable, right? The reference from this list, because we want to do this action to everything in the list. So now we want to float add. Right, so let's make a new variable called player heat, and we can now add the current value, and we just finish and go back. So when this runs through, it runs through everything in the list, and once it's done, what do? Well, we need to do a next frame event. Alright, so let's add a finished and next frame. So after we've waited one frame, we don't want to just go straight back in. I mean, you could. I'm not going to though. We want to set float value, just a normal set float value, not an FSM. And we want to take the player's heat, put it to 0. and then we can go back in and loop. Right? So this guy here, I am going to, so you know what, let's just move him here. Just like that. So when we add, we set everything to 0 and we run through. Now we could reset this guy here when we come in here, but I don't think that's necessarily needed, right? So well, we have this add and remove, and if you watch, well, let's go play. Let's stick this into the input so we can watch this out here as well. But we should now see. We're adding, right? So there's a player's heat. Now the heat 0, but that's fine. So as we start coming in, we see our player's heat starts climbing. And as we leave, it's like, oh, look at that. We're just going to sit idle. There's no point in running through the array if there's nothing in the array, right? So it's just a nice, easy way to help keep things optimized and clean. And the beauty part is this guy here, right? Like if we were to say to duplicate him, move this one here, let's spin him like this, maybe duplicate him again. Now you should prefab these when you're done with these, right? So then you can move them around wherever, spawn them, do whatever you want. Let's move this one like that, right? So let's take our little player here and let's just move him over here. And then I'm going to show you a couple more quick little tricks. So here now we have the player. So he's sitting over here and we can see his heat is 0. I come into here and I can see I've built in the guy here, but I don't have any heat yet. Right? Oh, we have heat there. We're not getting it here. So we gotta wonder why. Why? What did we do? We're going through all this fun stuff. So this guy, now let's look at this guy. We know we're in him. He is active. Distance to center. Oh, you know what? So these guys all have triggers, right? So let's do something like this real quick. Let's take all of these because they all have colliders, and we could add a layer, right? We could do whatever. I'm gonna put these on the ignore raycast. They don't really need to, and that's gonna let these automatically ignore raycasts. As easy as that sounds. Just now you could layer mask those out, but it's not really needed, right? So now we should have, this should work a little better, right? So we have our heat. We come along here and we have no heat at all. These guys are there, but they are not working. Why aren't they working? They have the value, they're ray casting, they have a hit point, they have a distance, and they have a radius. And we're remapping. Distance to center is 12. No, that's not the case. I'm sorry, Mr. Math, you were wrong. Right? That is not right. So I'm thinking we're still hitting I don't think that layer thing works. If I move up, see how the value's changing a bit? So let's just put these things on a layer. That's what I was going to originally do. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's add a layer. Call that light, and let's put those all on light. Yeah, sure, whatever. And now, okay, so let's go into these. When he's active, he has a light. He hits layer mask. Hits everything but player. So now, you know what? It'd be better. So the ground has a layer ground. I think we're better off because we don't want to hit the player, but we don't want to hit the lights, but we do want to hit ground. So let's take the invert out and just make this ground. Let's just target the ground. I think that's going to be the easiest, most effective solution. Right? I think. Take away the invert and target the ground. So we're only going to raycast to the ground instead of raycasting everywhere except for, you know, the player or whatever. So now that should fix that little issue. So now come trucking along. I don't know where anything is. There we go. So now we have heat. We have a NAND value. We got to fix that. We got to clamp stuff. He's a NAND. He's a NAND. We got NANDs. On NANDs. Let's see what's happening. Hit point is 0, 0. Hit point is 0. Why aren't you hitting anything? That doesn't make sense. Let's debug that. He is flying through the ground. He is not hitting anything. Ground, and that is ground. No, like that should be there. That should be hitting. Oh, I have 2 ground layers? That's weird. I don't know why I have 2 ground layers. It's from doing a tutorial, I swear to God. Alright, so so we need to fix that. That's obviously not a good thing. That's a horrible thing. Right? Let's go to add layer. I'm changing this. Well, I'll call it ground 2, because that's confusing as hell. Right, so this guy's on ground, not ground 2. Right, and if you look at these things, they're targeting ground 2, and they need to be on ground. Oh man, that's a way to mess someone up. That's for sure. Right, so okay, he's on ground. All right, so that should take care of those NANDs. So, where are we? Let's grab our player again. So we have our heat value. See, there we are. So there's our heat climbing. No more NANDs. Come over here and we have heat value climbing. Heat value, and you notice how if we sit in between them, it actually goes above because it's adding them both. And that's why we use this list, right? So we're compounding that effect. Now we could clamp that, so we say, oh, you know, well, 1's high enough. We just go to 1, call it good, right? And it'll just hit a flat 1, which is great. You know, and I think I'll probably do that. Let's, you know, we add this stuff, and right here, let's just do a float clamp. Right, so we add, so player heat is now clamped at 1, not every frame. Don't put these on every frame or you're going to have issues. Okay, So now, if we have this little eye thing that I made randomly, and it's just an image, there's absolutely nothing special about that. Let's move its scale to 0. Right? Now, what if we have other effects on our player, right? We can call this one eye, and let's add the active and inactive states to those. And what else? You know, let's do another one. Let's just copy this FSM and rename it, because we haven't actually added any logic to it. Call this one color. Okay, so if we go into the heat manager, if we are here, we know that we can send event, make sure this is underneath the empty, that we can go to the eye and say you are inactive. And we can also go to the color and say inactive. Copy, and let's say every cycle in here it is not every frame active. So that means these are going to fire off every frame. So we really don't need to use every frames down in these two, because they're going to catch an event every frame. So the eye, all we're going to do is let's get FSM float, and we can get from the heat manager, get the player heat. We just call it player heat here. We don't need this every frame, and we can scale. Set scale, put it below the float. We're going to set the scale of the eye on its y, I to the y, like that. And if we're inactive, let's set the scale to 0. Right? Now the color, let's do get FSM float. So we can go into the heat manager, exact same idea. We're going to get the player heat, and this time let's just do a float compare. Okay, so if player heat is, say, above 5, if it's greater than 5, turn red. If it's less, turn blue. There we go. And this guy here, well, he'll more or less end up being the blue anyways. We can almost just move him down there. Get rid of this one. So this one here is set color, and let's set, so we're turning ourselves red, let's turn them red, copy, paste, inactive, let's turn blue, let's copy that one and make that in the start state as well, so we, we're uniform. And now, just those two little simple FSMs will add a bunch of, functionality, I guess, or functions. Because we're blue, we go into here, the eye is starting to open, right? And we've turned red because we are now too light. Go over here, turn blue, turn red, turn blue, turn red, eyes opening, closing. Same idea, right? And that you can have screen shakes, those lights could be moving, you could do all sorts of stuff. Alright, cool. So what about directional light? Well, directional light's a whole nother beast. because we're actually going to do the opposite. Right, so we can add an FSM here, and we'll just do a real quick one. Sunlight. And all we're going to do is we need a reference to the sun, right? So you can make the sun a global or whatever the case is. In this, I'm just going to drag it in here, even though that is kind of bad practice. So let's transform direction. And we're going to transform direction of our sun forward. So that's sun direction. And we can do this every frame. And now let's raycast. Raycast 1, raycast 2, whatever. And all we're really looking for is the environment, right? So we, like it's raycasting from ourselves, world space, in the direction of the sun direction. And this could be bigger. And let's do did hit. Now this should be really all it is. Now if the direction is actually down, then you kind of want it, it'd be cold, which I mean, I guess technically it should hit the, this should be a true, right? Let's see, let's put our debug on. So there's a direction, it's firing off that direction. Where is our sun? Is in that same direction, right? And it is not hitting anything. How's it hitting? It's hitting something there. Oh, it's probably hitting a light. Right. So we need to put a filter on that. And now it's down here. We're hitting something, right? It's true. It's more or less. Actually, you know what? We kind of want to flip that, don't we? Sun direction. Right. Let's go negative. We want to go the opposite of the direction. Because now, if the sun's looking down this direction, we're raycasting upwards. Yeah, we want the opposite, right? So it's false. So if it's false, the sun is hitting us, right? And we can turn this as well. But if we say start going this way, once it hits here, the sun isn't hitting us anymore. We're not in the light. Right, which would make sense because the sun's, technically, he's going down the horizon. Let's. Do I have this sun? Oh, I do have him there. Okay. Oh, I don't have the skybox on up here, but I have him down here. Right, so the sun goes down. And we can see true. False, we're in the sunlight. So, okay. So let's make him a -1. And we should put a filter on this guy. That we're only looking for that ground layer, really. Right? And if we now turn around and say make a box. And the box is like, I don't know, this. And he is on that same layer. Make sure that's a thing, right? So we could now have this value and just add it to the heat, right? Or whatever the case is, right? And we can do whatever we want with this value that we have. Right, so we know it's true. Let's turn on our debug so we can see this thing. Somewhere. Yeah, there it is. Now let's grab our light. What do I not have? I should have skybox. Oh, there we go. I have my light turned off. Right, so here we are there. Now you would obviously want to put logic on the lighting so it's not, you know, shining, trying to shine the light upwards. That's a different story. Right, so we come down here and we can see we're true. We hit. We're blocked from the light, so we're shadow is true. We're in the shadow. I don't know what you can call that. Right. And if it's up here, okay, so it's false. So we're in the light, right? Which makes sense. There we are. And if we move our player, we can see is true, is false, is true, is false, is true, right? We're in the shadows, we're not in the shadows, right? So now we're dealing with the directional light, right? And you could set this FSM up to also do the light stuff, or whatever it is, or feed into the heat, right? Because in this guy, bool convert, you could take did hit, sun heat, and true or false, and put that in every frame. And if it's false, it's say 1. If it's true, it's 0, or whatever. This could be a 0.5 or something, 0.7. I don't know. Be anything you want. Right. So now in the heat manager, prior to these two updates, let's just get FSM float. And let's go to the sunlight, grab the sun heat, like that. Do a float at. We can also bring in the clamp if we want. We don't have to. I'm not going to bring in the clamp right now because you'll be able to see it a little better if I don't. So I said prior to these, let's add player heat and add sun heat. There we go. So now the player's heat is 0, and if I move the player around, our heat climbs, does all its proper stuff. Come back over here and I grab the light, directional light, and we move that. There we go, and then we have light coming down. And I can, where's our guy? That is our guy, yeah. So let's see. So he's true right now, so he's a 0, 0.70, 0.70. Right, so that part's working. And yeah, so player heat's 0.7. That doesn't make any sense. Oh, because we're in the remove, right? Okay, so we gotta fix that. Right. So we need to just fix that real quick. So if we're not in there, then really our, let's put that underneath that stuff. Let's just store that straight as player heat. That one we can do every frame though. Which means I guess we could do these every frame if we really wanted to then. Or do a float compare on this one, and then if it's greater then call these. If you want to really optimize, but I'm not that worried about it right now. We just want to make sure it works. That's the thing we're looking at. So we take our lovely little light and we bring it down. Okay, cool. Now we take our player and we say we are here. Close this down. We can see the player heat's at 0.7. Right, so we're playing around in the daylight, and we get into this stuff. Man, that play is climbing now. We're playing in the daylight, and we got the sun or these spotlights. And if I get into the shadows, it goes to 0. Back out of the shadows. Ba-doop. Right, and there's a nice little way you can play with lights. Well, anyways, hopefully that video wasn't too long, and we'll talk to you later.